Hi, everybody. My name is Nikki Hernandez. I am the outreach coordinator for the Address Confidentiality Program. I have been with the program for a little over 2 years now, and I'm really excited to be doing our very first webinar with you all.
Yeah, and I'm Xitlale Garcia. I also go by Lolly. I'm the new participant and bilingual specialist at ACP. I've only been there since July. And I also want to do a quick shout out. I'm also part of CCASA's Colorado Latinx Leadership Network, and I know some of our other members are listening, so I wanted to say, hey guys, thanks for listening, and I'm excited to get started.
Awesome. Okay, so the title of our webinar you see is Strengthening Survivor Safety Plans Through the Colorado Address Confidentiality Program. So just to provide you with a little overview of what we will be talking about, we'll be discussing the creation and purpose of the program itself. Lolly will share more detail about how it works from becoming a participant to what receiving your mail looks like. We'll also talk more specifically about the benefits of the program. That'll be a lot of the bulk of how the program supports an existing safety plan. We'll follow it up with some information about becoming an application assistant, and then of course answer any questions that you all may have. But if you have any comments, questions throughout the webinar, feel free to type that into your question chat box and we will answer them accordingly. All right. So before we get into what is the Address Confidentiality Program, and just so you know, I will be referencing ACP. That's just a short for the Address Confidentiality Program because it is really long to say it every time. So just to clarify that, and then if there are any questions on any of the other language that we use, feel free to ask us. So that's all clear. We should have a poll come up here, just wanting to gauge what knowledge you have already about our program. So if you could just take a couple of seconds to fill out that poll, it will be asking you about how familiar you are, just so we can actually try to tailor this webinar to your needs and your questions.
Great, so as those are coming in, and they're shifting quite quickly, but as you all are voting, we have about 14% who say they've never heard about it. 36%, actually, again, that's jumping around. 38% say they've heard about it, but don't really know what ACP does. 28% have seen ACP present at a conference event, but need a refresher. We have 11% who have recently gone through an ACP training, and 11% who could teach this training. They know so much about it. So we're gonna leave it open just for a couple more seconds. Make sure that you are voting if you're interested in voting on that. And then I'm gonna go ahead and close it now and share those results with you all. They didn't shift too much from that last bit that I shared. So the last two, you can see your 11%. 11% both have recently gone through an ACP training and could teach the training, that they know so much about it. 16% never heard about ACP. 32% heard about it but don't really know what ACP does, and another 32% have seen ACP present at a conference event but need a refresher on that.
Okay, Maria, thank you for sharing those results with us. So I'm excited that people who could teach this training are still participating. Thank you all for being willing to spend some more time with us. It looks like a majority of you could use some more information. So I will just open it up to if you have anything specific about the program that might come up as we go through these slides, or anything that you wanted to know and brought you to this webinar, feel free to put that in the question chat box so we can make sure to address it. So thank you all again. We will proceed. So what is the Address Confidentiality Program? We were created in 2008 in the state of Colorado through state legislation with the purpose of supporting survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking and harassment. And the way we support survivors is by providing two main services, which are mail forwarding services and a legal substitute address for people to use in creating public records. So the idea is that people can use this substitute address as their legal address in place of their actual address, and that way, if someone is trying to find them through public records, they're not going to find their actual address. Something important to know about it is that it is a safety tool. It is part of an existing safety plan, a comprehensive safety plan, but it is not a safety plan within itself. So you'll see as we go through this webinar that there are some limitations to the program that make it a little bit more challenging, not only to be a participant, but also to maintain your confidentiality in every situation. So it is not foolproof. It is meant to be part of a safety plan for someone. So the program itself, since inception in 2008, we have served over 7,500 participants across the state. So like I mentioned, we are a statewide program. We have participants in 48 of the 64 counties in Colorado. So we're definitely working on trying to expand to reach those areas, mostly those rural areas and on the eastern part of the state that aren't utilizing the services as much. And currently we have about 3,600 active participants in the program. All right, so just so you can get an idea before we go into much detail about it, this is some feedback that we have gotten from new participants in our program. So we do a survey, send it out every month to our new participants and ask them for some feedback about how they have experienced the program. So you see a lot of comments, positive comments about feeling a little bit safer, feeling more confident in their own home as a result of the services that we provide. And then the pie chart there on the left, that is directly asking about how they feel in regards to their safety after having follow-up contact from our new participant bilingual specialist, Xitlale here. So she is mostly the one responsible for reaching out. As soon as someone is enrolled, they're getting a welcome call to answer any questions that they may have about the program. Just let them know that everything's been processed. And then a couple of weeks after that, Xitlale is also following up with those new participants again to make sure that they're able to use their substitute address correctly and again answering any questions that may have come up in that amount of time. So because of that, about 75% of the new participants that responded to the survey felt like they definitely had an increased level of safety as a result of that. So that's definitely what we're going for and what keeps us going on our harder days. All right, so there are similar programs across the United States that are either called address confidentiality programs or stay-at-home programs. All of the states here represented in green are states that have passed legislation to create a program. The program is going to offer the same two services that we provide here in Colorado, which is those mail forwarding services and a legal substitute address. However, it is important to understand that these programs don't operate the same way. They don't look the same in terms of the services, enhanced services that they can provide. So for example, the state of Oregon has one staff member currently, and the most that they can really do with that is forward mail to all of their participants across the state. We are really fortunate here in Colorado that we have a bit larger team. Right now we have 7. Hoping to hire someone new, so we'll be at 8 when we're fully staffed. But because of that, we're able to provide those services like the follow-up calls, the welcome calls, and the case management once someone is enrolled. So we are really hands-on once someone gets enrolled in the program. We're not just forwarding their mail and never talking to them again. We're trying to communicate with them and make sure that they are doing all that they can to keep their address confidential. So other states, the Tennessee, District of Columbia, and Hawaii all passed legislation last year. So hopefully they will be having programs coming up soon. And hopefully one day we will have the entire United States covered with programs so that survivors have access to this as a resource if they need it. Another important thing to note about this before we move on is just that participants are not able to transfer their participation between states at this point. So if we have someone coming from Washington's program coming to Colorado, they're not automatically enrolled or can't just transfer that enrollment. They do need to go through our process independently in order to become a participant in Colorado. That's the same for if people are moving out of state, then they are going to need to enroll in a different state's program if they want to utilize that resource. We do have on our website contact information for all of these programs. So if you are interacting with a client who might want that information, you can either refer them to our office or find that on the website so that they can get set up. All right, so I'm going to pass it off to Xitlale. She'll give you some more information about how the program works.
Thank you, Nikki. So yes, what we're going to talk about next from here on is pretty much what it looks like for someone who might be interested in enrolling in our program. But before we do that, we have another poll for you guys. And this is just to get an idea of where you guys are at and understanding what types of victimizations we serve. So if you wouldn't mind taking another minute to answer that poll. There's no right or wrong answers for that one.
Cool. So right now we have a little bit more than half of folks that have answered. And so far we have 94% E and 5% B. And those are still coming in. We have about 79% voted at this time. So again, make sure to put in your vote, whether it's A, B, C, D, or E. And those don't seem to be fluctuating very much, again, with 95% saying E and 5% saying B. We do have another one that just came in, so we just shifted a little bit to 5% D, A and B only. So we have mostly everybody participating, so I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. Thank you for participating, and then I'm going to go ahead and share that so everyone can see. We had just a slight shift there, so we have 4% saying A, sexual assault. We have 4% saying B, domestic violence. We have 4% saying D, A and B only, so just sexual assault and domestic violence. And then we have 87% saying A, B, and C. I'm going to go ahead and hide that and turn it back to you, Xitlale.
All right, thank you. Thanks, guys, for answering that. I really like how that turned out. It looks like most of us are on the same page. So like I said, there's no wrong answers necessarily. We do definitely serve victims or survivors of domestic violence. And the reason we wanted to ask that is because there is often that misunderstanding that that's all we serve. But the correct answer is actually the last one. We serve victims of all of these victimizations. And we also wanted to kind of just make that point that while we do serve mostly survivors of domestic violence, there are other situations that could qualify somebody for being eligible to enroll in our program. For example, one that someone may not think of is someone who witnessed a crime. And so they may feel that because they witnessed something happen, their information being made public might put their life or their family's life in danger. And so they would be someone that might consider enrolling in our program so that they could keep their information confidential. And just like we also don't only serve women and children, of course. So anybody that is a survivor of these victimizations could be eligible for our program. So next here, we're going to talk about the 4 statutory requirements. As I stated, someone that's interested in enrolling would have to be a survivor of these victimizations, but it could be whether it has actually happened or if it's just the threat of it happening. Going along with the second requirement, they do have to have a fear for their safety if they're wanting to enroll. That one's pretty straightforward. The third one is relocation. Now, we do have that as a requirement that they have either relocated in the last 90 days or plan to relocate in the future. And the reason we have that is because if there's someone who has been living somewhere for more than those 90 days, there's a big chance that their information has already been shared. And that's hard to get that information redacted. But if it is within that 90-day period, then someone who is in our program could reach out to state or local government agencies to ask that that information be redacted. But it, like I said, has to be within that 90-day time frame. And then the other one, like I said, if they have to plan to be moving in the future, if they have not already moved. And so it's good to have those 2 options there for them. And the last of the 4 requirements is that we do have to have some sort of evidence come in when someone enrolls with us. And while that could absolutely be something like a police report or a court record, it can actually also be something like a letter of support from a victim service provider or other professional that is working with that survivor. Because if you think about it, there are some survivors that never really made a report about what happened to them, or may just may not have record, like a documentation of it. And so we provide that option for survivors to be able to have some sort of evidence from a professional that can say, hey, this person went through this. I believe they'd be a good fit for the program, and we consider that as good enough evidence for their application. So those are the 4 requirements. Moving on. Okay, so like Nikki was saying, we serve the entire state of Colorado, and unfortunately these victimizations are going to be happening everywhere, and it's important that we have accessibility to all survivors that are seeking our information. So what we have is what we call application assistance. From the poll earlier, we know some of you guys are or have been application assistants, and who those are just victim service providers around the state that already have that contact with survivors and can have a conversation with them and provide information about our program. And so what happens is they are the ones, since they already meet with them, or since they are better able to meet with them, they're the ones who determine whether or not a survivor is eligible and fit for our program. And so, excuse me, if someone is interested in enrolling, they will meet with this application assistant. And like I said, have that conversation about, about what our program does and whether or not they are fit.
Yep. So just to make it clear, though we mostly work with advocates as application assistants, we do have people in other types of agencies that can also fill this role. So people in human services, we have trained and certified as application assistants, as well as things like school counselors in primaries, well, not primary schools, but in high schools we could have them in different school districts. And then we do work with some campus-based advocates as well. So really, if anybody is providing direct services, information, referrals as part of their job, then or volunteer work, then they'd be eligible. So it's not strictly advocates, though that is the majority of them.
Okay, so like I was saying, anybody who would be interested in enrolling in our program would meet with one of these application assistants. And and they would have that conversation of our services, and the application assistant will then decide whether or not that survivor not only is eligible for our program based on those 4 statutes or 4 requirements, but also whether or not they are fit for our program, because like any kind of commitment, it does take a little bit of effort on their part. They would have to advocate for themselves and communicate with us once they are enrolled about any changes or anything like that. So that once the application assistant decides that they are eligible, they will sit down with them, or they will give the survivor, they'll give the survivor an application to fill out, and then the application assistant will submit it to our office. And what happens after we get that application is we are just going to look at it to make sure we have the right information, but at that point, we're not going to be looking at it and deciding whether or not that person's actually eligible, because that has already been decided when the application was signed and submitted to us. So when we get the application, a staff member or myself will take a look at it, make sure it's complete, and then I will generate their substitute address and prepare their welcome materials to be sent out to them. And in our next slide here, you're going to see what those materials look like. And I also want to just mention, we call the address that we generate the substitute address. Sometimes we'll also call it an ACP address. They're the same thing, but just for clarification, I wanted to point that out in case I accidentally switch between the two. So this is what the welcome packet that we send out to our participants looks like. On the left-hand side, you'll see that participant handbook. And what that has is processes that could be like helpful information for the participant and how they might interact with agencies or public or private companies when they want to use their substitute address. So it's a good reference for them whenever they're going to have those interactions and are not sure what they'll have to do. We also provide forms, which you can't see in the picture, but there's forms in there if they need to send anything to, or if they need to like request information from their schools, if their children are enrolled, if they need to update any information with us, there's forms for that as well. There's also, you can see there, a voter registration form, and that is a form that they could use specifically to enroll as an ACP participant, and they could use their substitute address on that so that their actual information is not public when they vote, which is pretty cool. On the right-hand side, there are some letters that we send them. There are 3 letters that we send. There's a welcome letter, which it's just welcoming to the program, explaining what information is in their packet. There's a general participation letter that they could use if they're having an interaction with somebody that does not understand, they want to use their address. So if they're interacting with somebody that doesn't understand the services that we provide, they could show them that letter, just kind of explaining briefly what our program is and that they are enrolled. And the last letter is right there on top on the right-hand side, is what we call the county residency letter. And so if there's a participant that has enrolled with us and they're seeking county-based services, they would use that letter to show which county they actually live in, because the address that we generate for them is actually our office address, and then they get assigned an apartment number. But that address would put them in Adams County. And like we were saying, we serve the entire state. So if they're not actually in Adams County and they wanted to seek those services, they could use this letter just to show that they are eligible for services in the county that they actually live in. Now the last thing in this that I want to share with you guys is you'll see a card at the bottom of that folder on the right-hand side. That's what we call an authorization card. And anybody that enrolls in our program, each participant will get their own authorization card. And what it has on there is their legal name, their substitute address, and their assigned apartment number, their expiration date, and their unique authorization number on the backhand side. And the importance of this card is excuse me. The importance of this card is it's what they would show, or what they would present if they were to go to a state or local government agency when they're requesting to use their substitute address. And it acts as proof of being enrolled in our program, though it is important for them to have that on them whenever they're going to have those interactions. And I believe, let me see. Yeah, so that's all the materials that we send them when they enroll with us. We also have these materials in Spanish, so if we get anybody enrolled that speaks Spanish, we are able to send that out to them, luckily, so that's pretty cool. And so that's it. Next, we're going to talk about what it looks like after a participant starts to use their substitute address. Another common misunderstanding that we have encountered is that once a participant enrolls in our program, they think that their mail will automatically start being forwarded through us, and that's not the case. In order for us to begin forwarding their mail, a participant will have to give their substitute address out to whatever agencies they are interacting with. And once we do start receiving all that mail, what we do is we will sort all of the mail that we get by the apartment number, and then we will repackage it, and then we will send it out to the participant. And so in a second, I'm going to show you an example of what that might look like right here. And so this is just an example of what the mail that we send out looks like. We will put whatever mail that they would have received in one of these manila envelopes. We have bigger sizes if they have a lot more mail. And then we put one of these labels on it with their name and their actual address. One option that some participants may decide to use is we can let them use what we call a safe label name. And what that is just an alias that someone might choose to use to keep their name, their legal name, and their actual address separate. And so we could do that for them. But we do have to remind them to not use a name that would draw a lot of attention. We've had some interesting requests in the past, and so we like to just remind them not to use any names that are like celebrity names or anything else that might, like I said, bring attention to to the letter. But it is a nice option for those who want to just take that extra step and that extra precaution with their mail. And the types of mail that we do forward, we don't forward everything. So we forward first-class mail, certified and legal mail. And then because it has to come in through us and we have to take the time to sort everything and get it repackaged, we like to tell our participants that there's a 3 to 5 day delay, longer than it normally would take if it was going directly to them and not through us. We are actually pretty good at getting that process down, so really it should only take a couple of days, but we tell them that just to be on the safe side. And the couple of things that we don't forward, unfortunately, are packages or junk mail. But for those that don't want to enroll because of the packages sign, we do have other suggestions that they could like other options that they could use in order to get those packages to their house. One example could be if they're ordering from Amazon is required they put your legal name, and so they could send themselves packages to another name. And then we have other suggestions in there as well in that input for them. Let's see, I think that most of this information there. So that's a general idea of what it might look like for someone who's interested in enrolling and then who enrolls with us and then begins using their substitute address. So now we're going to move on with Nikki, and she's going to talk about what we're doing for a little break here.
It sounds like we might be having some issues with sound, which means that it's a good time for a break. we are obviously going through this at a pretty quick pace. So again, just a reminder, if you have anything specific that if you have anything specific that you want us to cover, that you want to make sure we address, then just type it into that chat box. Everything is fair game. We'll take a couple of minutes. How about we do until 12:40? So we'll take the next 6 minutes. If you need a bathroom break, feel free to do that. I'm also going to put up this optional chair stretching. We sit at our desks all the time, probably too much, and these are just some ways that we can try to come back into our body and make sure we're taking care of it. So you have the option to do that. We'll give you just the next 6 minutes and come back at 12:40. All right, welcome back everybody. I hope you had some time to explore these chair stretching options and get a drink, go to the restroom, or whatever you need to do. We will now continue on with the presentation. So the next section, what we're going to talk about is what protections ACP participants actually get once they're enrolled. So how does this program benefit them? We'll talk in terms of confidentiality, what information is considered confidential and what information is not considered confidential. This is really where the bulk of what we do comes into play. So confidential information. Most of this is straightforward in that anything related to a participant's actual address is going to be confidential information. We're not going to share that. We're not going to disclose it with anybody, with a few exceptions. The main exception is going to be a emergency request for the release of information from law enforcement. So this is a special process just for law enforcement to access a participant's actual address if there is reason for them to. So if a participant is under investigation for something, if there is a call for a welfare check on one of our participants, these are situations that law enforcement could then go through this process, which requires a couple of signatures and some explanation. There's a form for it, and it'll come to us. And as long as everything checks out, we are required to provide then the actual address for a participant. But barring that type of situation, street address, city, county, even the voting precinct for all of our participants is considered safeguarded information. So you'll see also there's unique identifying information related to a participant's home, work, or school address. So this was a part of the ACP statutes that was meant to help extend protections to maybe less obvious situations. So for instance, participants purchasing real property, they can make a request because of this statute, part of the statute, that their information related to that purchase not be placed on a county website. It does have to be a written request, but this is something available to them. There are other situations or types of information that might also fall into this. So if a participant has something or has a reason to think that someone can find them through their email address or again some other different type of identifying information, they can certainly make that request and refer to this part of the statute that it should be protected. And then Xitlale mentioned earlier as well that any records created within 90 days prior to someone being enrolled are required to be redacted. So an example of that could be is if somebody gets enrolled in our program today and a month ago they filed a police report for some incident and it disclosed their actual address in that report, they can, once they are enrolled in our program, go to that police department and make a request that that information is redacted from that record, from any releasable record. So they can replace it with their substitute address, but that request, as long as it is within the 90 days before enrollment, state and local government agencies are going to be required to redact that information for our participants. All right, so what is not confidential? This one is a little more confusing sometimes, particularly for our participants. Being enrolled in the program is not considered confidential information. Our program is not a secret. We don't want it to be. We want people across the state to know that it is a resource that is available to them if they need it. Similarly, when someone gets enrolled in the program, that date, that is not considered confidential. We do get calls sometimes from Human Services who want to verify that someone they have interacted with is eligible to use that substitute address and was eligible at a certain date. So that is something that we might provide over the phone. A participant's substitute address. This is what we want to show in public records. So this is the address that they should be providing, and again, creating that pattern that they are at that substitute address rather than their actual address. So it's not going to be confidential information. We have, for instance, had a participant call us and was concerned when she Googled herself, she saw the substitute address online. And that is a good thing. That is what you want to happen rather than having a participant's actual address show up. So, okay, so we got a question. You mentioned redacting information. So the question is, for anyone who can't see, you mentioned redacting information from the 90 days prior to enrollment. Is this redacted only in records released to the public, or must it be redacted prior to going to the prosecution or prosecutor? I feel like that's two different questions. I'm a little confused. So what type of record, Dina, what kind of record are you referencing that might go to a prosecutor? So I'll answer the first one, yes. Oh, a police report? Okay, so all releasable records, yes, would have to be redacted if they fall within that 90 days. And then if that paperwork is somehow getting sent to the prosecutor, it's going to be up to the participant to make sure that that information is redacted before it goes to the prosecutor. So nothing's going to happen automatically. Let me know if this answers your question or not, but nothing is going to happen automatically. It would be on the participant to make sure that as soon as they can, as soon as they're certified, they're going to get that information redacted so that if it does end up with a prosecutor or someone else who might not protect that information, it's only reflecting the substitute address. Does that answer your question? Maybe you can put it in the chat. Okay. Oh, okay, mostly yes. Okay. We can follow up with you afterwards also to make sure that you are clear on what we're able to do. Perfect. Okay. So we will move on. So I mentioned participant substitute address is not considered confidential information. And then any information voluntarily provided by a participant, this is once they are enrolled in our program. So we do recommend that all of our participants use their substitute address as often as possible. It is their legal home, work, and school address, so they can use it anytime anyone asks for that address information. That being said, if they are unsure and for some reason disclose their actual address, whether it's something like a rewards card that they're signing up for, or to even a state or local government agency, and they weren't sure, so they just provided their actual address, that information is no longer protected. So it's really important, if a participant has a question, to reach out to us or to look in their participant handbook for the answer before they provide it, because it's really hard to identify where and when that information was shared. Sometimes participants aren't even consciously aware of when they provided it, but at some point down the line they did. So that's really hard to try and reel back in once it's been shared with other entities. And then the final thing we don't consider confidential, any records created prior to that 90 days before enrollment. So if it happened, there was a police report 6 months ago, this participant would not be eligible to have that information redacted. Part of the reason is similar to why we ask that someone has relocated recently or plans to relocate in the future, which is that if that information has been available for an extended period of time, then it has likely been shared. And even redacting it from one of these records that it's reflected in might not really have an impact. So we want to prevent people from having a false sense of security. And that's why we have these kind of 90-day rules. All right, moving on to state and local government agencies. So this is really the core of the protection that participants get. In Colorado, state and local government agencies, all state and local government agencies are required to accept the substitute address. So I've listed here some of the main agencies that our participants interact with, but this is not a comprehensive list. So there are instances like DORA, Department of Regulatory Agencies, where we may have a participant who is required to put up their work address because they have a licensure that through DORA. That participant would be able to use their substitute address for that because it is a state agency. So just wanted to make it clear that this is not all of the agencies that are required to accept our participant substitute address, but courts, law enforcement, school, county-based services, driver's licensing, all of these, they have processes in place that we do train on as much as possible. I mean, it's a statewide program, so we aren't able to have a presence or training in every single court or every single school that might interact with our participants. But we are trying, now that we have an outreach position, we're trying to get that information out more. But unfortunately, because of that, because we are not able to reach all of the places across the state, there are lots of agencies still that are not really aware of us or not aware of what they're required to do as part of the ACP laws. So for instance, courts are required to use a substitute address if a participant makes a request and shows their authorization card. Then they can have all their court records reflect that substitute address. If someone at the courts is not aware of that and a participant is having trouble, we recommend that they give us a call. It's easiest if they have someone specific for us to contact rather than just an entire court. That way we can actually follow up with that person, provide the education, reference our statutes, and hopefully get them on board. But we are willing and able to provide that advocacy as needed. Law enforcement, so we mentioned the emergency release that they can make a request for the information. Other ways that we interact with them or our participants interact with them are police reports or 911 calls. So for police reports, it's easiest if they can do it at a police department. They can take their authorization card and make that report using their substitute address from the beginning. If there's a situation that they are requesting law enforcement respond to their actual address, they're calling 911 and there's something going on, then we certainly say that if there's an emergency, they should call 911 and not hesitate with that. But they do have to do a little bit more follow-up in those cases because that call is going to reflect their actual address. And so they can show the responding officer their authorization card, let them know that they would like any reports to reflect the substitute address instead of the actual address, but we still recommend that they follow up with those police departments in person and make sure that those releasable records show a substitute address instead. So schools, we provide forms, like Xitlale mentioned earlier, for parents to be able to still enroll their children in schools and have that information protected. So some of the enhanced types of services that we're able to provide are facilitating a transfer of school records between schools. So this is something that we can make sure that information is not being shared between those two schools in case an offender is able to access records at one school. They maybe won't be able to see where those records went and where the children are now going to school, if that makes sense. So we facilitate that process to, again, try and safeguard information that people might have access to. We can also verify district eligibility so that a participant does not need to disclose their actual address to a district for them to enroll their children in that district. So we can get a request from the school district and we can simply say yes or no that this person lives within district boundaries. If it's required that we need to determine whether it's the home school of that participant, we can also work with that without disclosing a participant's actual address. County-based services, participants are able to enroll or sign up for county-based services online through the PEAK system. They will need their substitute address and then their authorization number, which is on the back of their authorization card. They do also have to state which county they are in, that they actually reside in online, but then it'll automatically pre-populate all of their address information and then they can continue with trying to receive services. For driver's licensing, participants need to go in person to get a replacement card, so they're not able to simply update their information. And just to reiterate, all of these processes are in place as a result of conversations with these different agencies and trying to work with what information they need in their processes while still maintaining our participants' confidentiality. So they may evolve in the future, but this is what they are now, and all of this is going to be outlined in the participant handbook for our participants to reference. So driver's licensing, they do need to get a replacement card in order to have it reflect their substitute address. And then voter registration is something that I think is underutilized in our program currently. It is a huge way, voter registration information is a huge way that information is shared and made public. So, people are able to go to the Secretary of State's website. If they have some identifying information, they can look up a voter and find their current voting address. So that is why we recommend participants who are going to be planning on voting should go through this process to become an ACP voter, because it is the highest level of confidentiality in the state of Colorado that any voter can have. What that means is that our participants, once they are ACP voters, their information is not going to be placed on the Secretary of State's website, so it won't be accessible if someone is searching their information. It won't be on any paper document that is released, so if someone were to go in person and pay the small fee to get a list of all of the Colorado voters, then ACP voters are not going to be on there, none of their information. And then on top of that, there are only up to two people in each county, 2 election staff members that are specifically able to work with our ACP voters. So these are the people who would have access to an ACP voter's actual address, would help manage any changes to that voter registration. So everybody else besides these 2 ACP election staff members in each county are only going to see a substitute address and see that this person is an ACP voter. So it's another way that there is safeguards against people accessing participants' information. That form is also provided in the welcome packet. You can always send more if there are more adults in the household who want to utilize the program. Okay, we will move on to private companies, private businesses. So these private businesses in the state of Colorado are not required to accept a participant substitute address, but it is their legal home, work, and school address, like we mentioned. So again, participants should be using it anytime they're being asked for their address information. So that includes grocery stores, getting their car fixed, clothing stores. Most of the time, because our substitute address looks like an actual address, like an apartment, and is not a PO box like some of the other states, we are fortunate that participants can provide that address pretty seamlessly with most places. Where it gets tricky is with home-based services. So home-based services like utilities, television, internet services, all of those are going to want to know where a participant is going to be receiving services. If they need to set something up, they need that actual address. So there's really no getting around it with them having to provide that actual address. So what we have done is we have created business agreements with certain companies, mostly along the Front Range, that are able to still provide those services to our participants, but will allow them to use an alias name associated with their account. So it's going to prevent their actual name from being connected to their actual address. And again, the intention is that if that information is ever shared or made public, people aren't going to know that it's them. So we have these business agreements with things like, or people like Comcast, Xcel Energy, CenturyLink, Colorado Springs Utilities. All of the places we have these business agreements with, we have listed in the participant handbook and contact information for our participants to work with directly. So there's going to be a different path for them to receive those services that is specific to ACP participants. But that is all provided to them up front. We can, of course, provide guidance if they need it. If they're trying to work with a private company or business that does not have an agreement with us, then it does require them to be more of an advocate for themselves and utilize those letters that we provide them with in their welcome packet and explain why they might, why they're requesting this extra confidentiality. We do also give them some suggestions that they could take to a private company, something like using their substitute address as a mailing address, maybe only using their initials on their account. If that company is willing to let them use an alias name, you know, you never know, that they might be willing to do that, but it requires that extra work on the participant's part and is also subject to whatever that company is willing to do, since they are not bound by ACP laws. So similar issues come up with insurance. Insurance companies want to know where the property or item that they're protecting is located. And so this is a situation where a participant can decide, decide what is going to be okay with them, what they're willing to accept, more or less. So they're fully able to use their substitute address for insurance purposes, but that might mean that they're going to incur a larger premium or fee associated with that insurance if it's in Adams County and they maybe live somewhere with a lower premium or lower fee. So again, it's going to be what is going to fit for their situation. If they're willing to do that to maintain their confidentiality, they're definitely able to do that, but we don't have a list or anything of that sort for insurance companies that have agreements with us to keep participant information protected, unfortunately. All right. So that's the bulk of our presentation. We're going to get into some other things here shortly, but before we do, is there anything we didn't cover that people want to know more about, whether it's real property or we have some guidance on ending a lease prematurely? if you have anything you want to know about that, speak now, forever hold your peace. I'm just kidding. Just put it in the chat box if you do. All right, and I'm going to pass it over to Lolly to share some about application assistance.
All right. So recently we decided that we wanted to get a little bit more feedback from our application assistants. And so these are some of the really nice responses that we got about what they think about our program and why someone might be interested in becoming an application assistant. And now all of this was really just to be informational for you guys, but if you do have any interest in finding out more information, please let us know. As you can see, some of the responses there are that our program has provided extra safety precautions, closing some of the safety gaps. My personal favorite was that it provides peace of mind in a client's journey of healing, and also providing or helping our participants feel more confident knowing that they can keep their actual location confidential. Another question that we asked in the same survey was kind of the amount of time it takes to fill out an application with the applicant or someone who's interested, and it was pretty 50-50. Some people said it took from 0 to 30 minutes, and there was the other half was 30 minutes to an hour. And I really think that kind of just depends on not only the application assistant's understanding of all the information, but also how frequently they provide that information, because it is a lot. We've had a lot of information just in this webinar for you guys. Then it also would, of course, depend on the person that is interested in enrolling and their understanding and how that conversation goes. And so, but I don't think we got anything more than an hour, right? Like, we didn't get any response that it took more than an hour, did we?
We got a couple, but yeah, they were definitely the outliers.
Yeah, so it's just something to consider. If you were interested, let us remind you, if someone to qualify to be an application assistant would have to be a direct service provider or a victim service provider, any professional that provides information or referrals, for whether it's for their job or for something that they do for volunteer work. And so if you are interested, we have our last poll for you guys, and it should be popping up here soon, just whether or not you would like some more information. I think there's a way that if you answer yes, that we'll know who to reach out to and provide that information to. And that will bring us to the end of our presentation. Thank you guys so much, and please let us know if you have any questions about anything. I know we had a lot of information for you guys.
Yeah, and just while we're waiting for some of those responses to the poll, again, if there's anything really specific you want, you can also reach out to us. We'll share our contact information here on the screen once you're done with that poll. But this was, this was our first webinar that ACP has ever done. So we wanted to keep it more general in nature. If we were to set up an agency training for your group, then know that a lot of it would be similar information, but of course tailored to what type of agency you're at and what specific questions you have. So that's what I really value about our in-person training, is that people have all kinds of unique questions that we don't necessarily address in our presentations. And so I like having to figure out, what the answers to those questions are, because I might not know them. We might not know them off the top of our head, but certainly things that are important to your clientele and to the program to know how to support both our application assistants and participants. All right, so it looks like some of you are interested in follow-up. So like Lolly mentioned, we will be in touch and see how we can support you. But if there's nothing else, then we will let you all go, get back to your day. Thank you for spending the last hour and 10 minutes with us. We're getting out a little bit early, which is fine with us and hopefully fine with you. But thank you again, and we'll be in touch.
All right, thanks guys.
Awesome. Thank you both. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Xitlale. That was really informative and really helpful. I hope it was for all of you as well that were on the call. Please do not hesitate to reach out to Nikki or Xitlale if you have any additional questions. I will pass on the information of those of you who said yes, you would like a direct follow-up from them over to Nikki and Xitlale. I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for spending your time with us as presenters in doing this webinar. And then thank you all for sticking with us through that kind of sound issue that we had there in the middle. And we're glad we were able to fix it there towards the end. Any questions that you have, please don't hesitate to either send them to me or to send them to our presenters. Their contact information will also be in the follow-up email that you will be receiving here shortly. And that will contain copies of the materials, and it will also have a link to our YouTube page where our recording of this will be available as well. We do have the webinar tomorrow in case you are interested. It is part of our PRIA series, and it's titled Supporting Incarcerated Survivors After Release. And it's from someone from TASA, the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. So hopefully we might be able to see some of you there. Again, that's tomorrow from noon to 1:30. And again, don't forget to fill out the survey. It's really helpful for us and our presenters. And thank you again for attending the webinar.